Joe, we'll talk later.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for coming today. I want to start by thanking the women of the Women's Guild over here. Where's Betsy? There's Betsy. Betsy, can you introduce us to the chairs of this event, please?
Well, the chairs are, of course, Ann Duffy, Shirley Mosley, and my daughter Kate. This is her 7th year cooking. Somebody said to her, Kate, have you ever been to orientation? And she says, well, no, because I've never gotten out of the kitchen. But she'll give you an idea of what you're going to have tonight.
Yes. Go ahead. We have 2 types of bruschetta. We have Italian wedding soup. We have pasta with mushroom ragu, eggplant parmesan, 2 types of Italian wedding cookies, and wedding cake. And this was a fun opera, and we went Italian because we really thought we could do anything because it's an Austrian composer set with an opera set in Spain, sung in Italian, and we figured we'd already done food that would really cover the Austrian, German, and Spanish, so we decided Italian this time.
If you want to get any French cuisine, Beaumarchais wrote the play.
Well, I had to Wikipedia it because I did not know that, and I talked to them about that, but we
No.
Well, thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Thank
ladies.
you.
I'd like to now move us on to the show. We are here to hear about the Marriage of FIGARO, which will be opening in 2 weeks here at Mahalia Jackson Theater. And we have 2 of our leading principals for the production and the conductor here who are going to introduce themselves to you now.
I'll go first. My name is Twyla Robinson, and I grew up just down the street in Denham Springs, Louisiana. And I went to Centenary College up in Shreveport, which is now where I now teach. And whenever I graduated from there, I started the circuit of trying to find a master's program, and I ended up at the Factory at Indiana University, where there are 600 singers at any one time, much less anybody else. It's an absolutely enormous place. And after that, I started auditioning for young artist programs and ended up in San Francisco for 2 years. And then shortly after, I won the Met auditions in 2002, and I've been singing all over ever since.
Wonderful.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Now tell us about the role of the Countess.
The Countess. Well, it has been with me my entire singing life. I went to Centenary to study horn because where I grew up, we had no choir because, you know, that's kind of a poor part of our state. But, you know, wherever there is a football team, there is a marching band, right? So I was a horn player and a horn major all through college, and that's what I used to pay for school. But even though Centenary is a tiny place, we put on operas every year. And so my second role of my life in English at age 19 was the Countess. Because we believed that even if you got up and fell on your face because it was too advanced, at least you were up on your feet doing it. And I've been living with the role ever since. And I've sung it in San Francisco, I've sung it in Miami, this is my second time to sing it here. I really can't even keep up with all the places that I've sung it. So she has been my soul sister for a very long time.
So that underlying that fact that the last time we did it, you were a Countess as well.
I was.
Excellent.
And I'm glad to be back. Thank you.
Tom?
Well, I was brought up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and my father was a singer there. He did all the Messiahs and Elijahs, and one day when I was 15, he said, well, when you get home today, I'm going to give you a voice lesson, and you'll have 2 a week from now on. And that was out of the blue. When I was 18, I auditioned for the conservatory, singing Messiah, Refiner's Fire. And I got in for 6 years scholarship, and that's where I met Italo Tayo, who taught me Bartolo for the first time. First time I did this role was in 1974. So I've been doing it a long time, and it's absolutely like second nature to me. But the great thing about it is every time I do it differently. And depending on the director, I have to mold my character to what the director wants. But certainly learning the role with Italo Tayo and then doing it years later with Peter Sellers in the Trump Tower version of it. And then ultimately at the Met, I did the Pennell production, and then Jonathan Miller, I was in that production too. So I've been doing it with some really great directors, and I think that the one that we have here is doing a fantastic job too, because he's letting me kind of put my thing in my way of doing it into his concept, and that's great. This has always been one of my favorite roles. I think this and the Sacristan and Tosca are my two best roles, and Henry Kissinger too. And you know the opera Nixon in China. So I was the first Henry Kissinger, and have been doing that ever since too. So with these three roles, I can afford a house.
I think you all have read my bio in the program probably. I've been here many years. I think next season will be 16th or 17th season here. So the Marriage of Figaro is to me a very special work. And I hope that our conversation this afternoon, because I view these roundtables ideally as more conversational than lecture. Mm-hmm. I can stand here and talk about the Marriage of Figaro for an hour and a half if you want, but you don't really want that. What you want to do is have those questions answered, you know, everything you wanted to know about the Marriage of Figaro but were afraid to ask. And so this is really an opportunity to talk to people. I've conducted this piece many times. These artists have distinguished themselves in these roles, which is why they are asked repeatedly to do them. And you know, each time we create a production, we all learn so much about the piece itself. And so you're trying to come face to face with one of the great masterpieces of the operatic repertory. Mozart had a unique kind of genius. Not only this absolutely unfathomable ability to write music that just defies description. You know, there are anecdotes of the things that he did. For example, when he was 14 years old, he listened to a Miserere sung in Italy, 14-part choral composition that was 12 minutes long, and he wrote it down from memory. And they did not use music. It was taught by an oral tradition because it was considered such a sacred part of the service. And he was able to simply write it down after one hearing. And that is why he was inducted into the Order of the Golden Spur. Those things are almost bizarre. You know, Mozart was a great billiards player. And someone asked him why he was so attracted to the game, and he said, that's when I compose. You know, he's there at the billiards table. It's kind of a quiet sport, but it's all about angles and math and organization and that kind of thinking. And so Mozart would work through musical pieces mentally while playing billiards, not always, but frequently. And then he said the rest of him was just copying it down. And I don't know, you might have had the opportunity to see either the play or the film Amadeus. Mm-hmm. As a person steeped in musicology, I was amazed to find that it's factually accurate in many, many respects. There's a little bit of Hollywood exaggeration, but by and large, it does portray the phenomenal musical gift of Mozart. And maybe the question I'm most frequently asked about Mozart, who died at age 36, what would have happened if he had lived to be as old as Verdi? Where would music theater have gone in the hands of such a great genius? Mozart was ahead of his time. He lost a lot of his audience as a composer of symphonic music and concerti because his harmonic language was simply much more advanced than that period in Viennese musical life. But what we benefit from the richness of that harmony, of that musical language, is an ability to express insights into the human psyche that completely eluded other composers. When we talk about the world of opera, and we say, who are the composers that absolutely could peer into the souls of the characters that they are creating musically? Two names jump to the top of the list without a second's hesitation, and that is Mozart and Verdi. And they had a unique understanding of, first, what our emotional makeup is, so that drama unfolds in a way that is engaging but realistic, and then secondly, the ability to portray that in music. And that is why the list of operas that are produced worldwide, I once read the stunning statistic that about 120,000 opera scores were in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris at the end of the 20th century, and yet our world repertory is about 100 works deep. You know, we do the top 50 over and over, and that additional 50 are engaging, and we're familiar with titles, but so to have half a dozen works in that exalted list is really a wonderful accomplishment artistically. And you look at the list of composers, Verdi, Puccini, Mozart, Strauss, Wagner, that were able to accomplish that. And it gives us at least some measure of what the man's accomplishment was. Now, this work did not spring from a void. It is actually the 18th opera that Mozart wrote. And he was 30 years old when he composed it, or at least when it was first staged. And yet the response, we see this, and it's fairly accurately portrayed in the play and the movie about his relationship with Salieri, which was not so much about his relationship with Salieri, but with the court of Emperor Joseph. And the fact that there was an Italian opera company there. And of course, they saw this as an enormous threat to their role in being the principal court musicians. And so, yes, there were cabals, or as we know, as we use the term in opera history, a claque. A claque is a group of people that you paid to come to boo the people that you didn't like, whether it was a singer or the composer or whomever. And so there was a lot of that surrounding this premiere. But at the end of the day, Mozart's work really carried the public sentiment. And, you know, for all of the famous comment attributed to Emperor Joseph, too many notes, Mr. Mozart, you know, he did appreciate the genius of this young man, although he did not displace his resident court composer to give him this position, but he certainly rewarded it with this work and some others. So all of that is the overture, if you will, to a discussion about what it is that makes this piece so special. And it is the kind of boundless joy that we find in this music, in music that from the Countess's perspective is arguably tragic. And so, but you know, one of the things that always fascinates me is that in spite of the magnificence of your great arias, they're both in major keys. You know, it's that convention of if it's sad music, it must be in a minor key, and if it's happy, it must be in a major key.
And Barberina's is in, what, F minor?
F minor. About a 24-bar little cavatina, it's called, for a child, she's 12 years old, who lost a pen, and you would have thought the world was coming to an end.
Very
but,
much.
You know, but for the exalted and noble state of these characters and their sentiments, Mozart writes every piece in this opera in major keys, which is to me rather startling, because I've conducted a lot of Verdi and Puccini, and those traditions of how tragedy is expressed, it's always an interesting set of choices. But I look at it this way. It's sound, if you will, if I can mix a metaphor of light refracted through a prism. It's sound refracted through that prism with its emotional components and the power of language. And that is, how do we express our tragedy? How do we express our sorrow? Not necessarily tragedy to the point of death, but that sorrow of lost love or lost loyalty or dishonor or things of that sort. Mozart was able to paint in so many shades that it's quite remarkable music. And that's what we find, whether it's a chord progression in the recitative or whether it is an extended work like one of the Countess's arias. Now, Twyla, you shared with us your experience with the Countess. Now tell us about the person you're portraying.
Well, still relatively young. The way that we are performing it this go-round, and that changes a little bit every time you perform it, depending on the director's choices, is only about 2 to 4 years after the Barber of Seville. So she really hasn't broken 25 yet. And of course, in the Barber of Seville, she was a ward. She belonged to him as the man who was supposed to raise her, and she has married up in a serious way. Okay, so now she is a Contessa. What that really means, of course, and if you're familiar with Rosina from Barbieri, you realize that this is an extremely intelligent, resourceful, solution-seeking young lady, right? And here she is in the marriage of Figaro, and this man that she worked so hard to attain and finally managed to marry up, is now doing things that guys in large houses sometimes do back then. And he's chasing every skirt in the castle, and now he wants to exercise his droit de seigneur, which is his right to deflower every female before they get married. Okay? Not cool. And but what am I going to do, right? I mean, if I had nothing before I came to this marriage, I can't leave it. I can't own anything. The plight of women in that time was you were locked. You were absolutely locked. And everything is crumbling. Everything is crumbling around me because of his desire to philander, which hurts. They always talk about women just understanding that that's just how guys were back then, but I don't think any of them ever understood. They just dealt. They just dealt with it, right? And so here I am, and he talks about the tragedy of my arias. I think that the reason the arias are in a major key is because Verdi, Mozart, Richard Strauss, all of these guys had incredible psychological insights with their music. And what they did was what happens in the orchestra, not what happens in the text and not what happens on stage dramatically, but what happens in the orchestra is where he's laying your psyche bare. And even if you are trying to hide something inside, the orchestra will betray you every time. It's just like this running subtext that goes on underneath you. And okay, I'm really happy about something, and the orchestra's down there going, no, you're not, no, you're not, no, you're not. And whenever you take any given character and you strip them down to their essence, who are they fundamentally? The Countess is a character of hope. And so the orchestra strips her down, and that's why she's in a major key, because that's what's at her basis. She's always hoping to make things better. And those of you who were here last night, this is a bit of a repeat, but the thing I find the most challenging about the Countess is that my 21st century female mind has a hard time with the sheer amount of pure forgiveness that is required to make her situation tenable in this, where he's been chasing every skirt in the castle and there's not a darn thing I can do about it, okay? Does she, I have to ask these questions all over again and again every time I perform this role. Does she completely decide to forgive in that incredible moment in the last act? Is it like a curtain comes down and she decides to wash the slate clean? Or is it something that she has made up her mind, okay, I'm going to attempt to forgive this, and like those of us who live in the modern day, forgiveness is something you work on every day. It's not something that you just shut the door on and it happens. And so this hopeful, basically still a child female has to find a way to hope hard enough that she can make her situation tenable. And at the end, I do believe that hope wins.
Oh, I think without question.
It has been staged where she still ends with this cynical, it's never going to be any good, it's going to be crap for the rest of my life. But I don't think that, pardon my language, but that, I don't think that that's the way.
Well, you know, it's sometimes difficult to transliterate, if you will, the sentiments of past centuries where mores, social mores dictated certain kinds of behavior exclusively into the modern era. Now, I'm not a psychologist, and there are probably, sitting here in the room among us, those who could speak more fully to that than I could. But from an artistic point of view, I do think that the way that Mozart and Da Ponte resolved the situation at least brought it to a joyous conclusion. And if a stage director wants to do some what we call régie theater, and that is, or it also goes by the term Euro trash, that none of these emotions were ever really resolved or sentiments fully addressed, then I can't quibble with that, because I think as adults we look at the world around us and we realize that the drama often continues. But for the purposes of catharsis, which is the heart of drama, we want to walk out of this theater thinking that, at least momentarily, all's right with the world. You know, that there was this moment of naked truth on the part of the Count, who kneels in front of his servants, in front of all of the household, and says, "Forgive me, I was wrong. Can you forgive me?" And one of the longest quarter rests in the business is for us to find that answer. Will she say, and your response is so beautiful, because basically you say, I'm more capable of forgiveness than you are, which is also, you know, I have greater reserves of kindness than you are displaying, but the answer is yes. You know, so, Todd, you had asked me an interesting question, and perhaps it could be directed to Tom about the evolution of the character.
And that was my question to ask next.
Yeah.
To come in, as you know, Twilight actually brought up herself. as
Exactly.
Barbara Seville to the Marriage of Figaro, even though Marriage of Figaro came first in history of being written, chronologically in the Beaumarchais, it is the Barbara Seville first, and then the Marriage of Figaro.
Right.
So for both of you, putting on to Tom, who was our Bartolo a couple of years ago here as well with the Barbara Seville, to talk to him about the difference of the two composers treating this character in a chronological sense of the plot.
It's ironic that the more three-dimensional Bartolo is by Mozart. The character really pops out by what he says. And again, what the music says about him. But in Barbara Seville, it's a funnier role, I think. If you have to concentrate continuously to make it human, because as with so many Rossini operas and Rossini comedies, there have been 200 years of slapstick covering this. So you have to kind of weed out the phony stuff and choose the stuff for your character that makes it real. Not so much with the Nozze, Bartolo. Everything that he says leads you directly to how he really feels and makes you more of a human person. I think partly it's because of the great Lorenzo da Ponte libretto. I mean, it might be one of the greatest librettos ever written. And it's not just because it's based on a great play. He knew how to make a libretto and make it work for Mozart. I mean, what a team. It's like Gilbert and Sullivan almost, or it's more than that. And as a footnote, do yourself a treat. If you can find a copy of the autobiography of Lorenzo da Ponte, read it. Have you read it? Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. because he takes credit for everything. And you know,
He did say he thought Mozart was kind of talented.
yes, but by the time, and you know, he ended up in New York.
Teaching at Columbia University,
Yeah.
Italian literature.
He went to London to do a bookstore with his sister, got kicked out of there, went to Philadelphia, opened up a fruit stand in Philadelphia called DePonte's with a Y, DePonte's fruit stand. And that fell through, so then he went to New York. And I think he's buried in the Bronx. So, and he lived to be, I think, 90. So think of the amount of time that this guy lived from being, and he was born an Italian Jew. His name was really Conigliaro, and he took on the name De Ponte from his teacher, the priest that taught him. In answer to your question, all these factors that are in the libretto, for me, it's a better libretto than Barbara Seville. And it's much more real, and it makes my ability to play Bartolo in Marriage of Figaro as a much. You can play it for laughs, and I have played it for laughs, but I stopped doing that maybe 15 years ago, because in the sextet, which is the key for Bartolo, it's where he realizes that Figaro is his son, and that his wife, the mother, is Marcellina. That's not funny. That is heartbreaking. And I stopped. I said, I can't do this for laughs anymore. Now, when she says, "There's your father," and "There's your father," it's very funny. But if you play it for laughs, then it becomes shticky. You have to let the audience say, "Oh, jeez, this is fun," you know, and it always gets a laugh. But you have to you have to be true to it. You have to believe it in yourself, and that's the whole key to comedy. Ultimately, if you believe what you're doing is funny, it'll be funny. If you're adding on something that you think is funny, it won't be funny. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Well, and don't you think, Tom, that that's also because the characters on stage are having the same realization that the audience is having?
That's right. Yeah.
The Count is saying, and his attorney, who has hammered the case home, you're either going to pay Marcellina this contract or you're going to marry her. And all of the characters on stage are discovering this at the same time that the audience is. And that's his mother, that's his father, and then Don Curzio, the Count's attorney, makes a profound statement. Well, if that's your mother, then I don't think you can marry her. And that's where the humor rests, is this revelation. Todd, if you would like to steer the conversation in some direction, you did ask me to talk
Yes,
about
I
the
will
piece
take
in
it.
general.
I'm going to take it in a different direction now, because I want to talk about this new production.
Okay.
What the differences that we're going to see in this production. Everybody knows that so far this year you've already had 3 new productions with our Carmen, our Rusalka, and our Lucia, and now Marriage of Figaro will be yet another new production. Just tell us a little bit about what we're going to expect to see in this production.
Well, this is a traditional Notte di Figaro. I don't think it's necessary. It's certainly not problematic if you want to update it, as Peter Sellers did with the celebrated. He took the trio of Mozart da Ponte operas and set them all in modern context. Don Giovanni was 2 twin brothers that I'd actually worked with both of them, set in Spanish Harlem. Marriage of Figaro was set in the Donald Trump penthouse, and then Così fan tutte was set in Despina's diner. So she becomes a facilitator in so many ways. Those are concept productions. So we're not changing the concept of the Marriage of Figaro. We are still doing it with the Count. The Count is the hierarchy, the social hierarchy of the period that Beaumarchais and Da Ponte were writing about. What you'll see is some kind of new physical properties. We always want to go back and freshen up our inventory to create new and fresh looks for the stage. And so you'll see quite a bit of refinement there in our approach you know, as we maintain this piece in our inventory, we are eager to have new productions. But I have not in this case chosen to try to move it forward. The Lucia that we just produced, as you know, we moved from 17th century Scotland up to kind of Downton Abbey and set it in the 1910s, 1920s period, which invites then a very specific kind of costuming. So this piece will have lots of new components in it, but they will still reflect the age in which the piece was set. And with that introduction, I mean, if you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to answer.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes, certainly.
After I had done Nixon in China, I was kind of associated then with Peter Sellers, who's kind of, he was at the time the enfant terrible of the opera world. And he invited me to do this Marriage of Figaro in Barcelona. And I'd heard about it, and I said, Peter, I said, you know where I'm coming from. I mean, you know, Italo Taio, the whole Italian tradition. He said, yeah, I know, Tom, I know, but we'll do new things, you'll love it. I said, okay. So I bought the concept, and the genius of this particular opera is that those characters, every one of them exists today. Basilio is in the music business, you know, and Susanna is Ivana Trump's maid, and everything they say rings true except one thing. And I brought it up, and I said, I don't think the droit de seigneur is going to work, because that doesn't work anymore. We don't have that. In fact, we do have it. I saw a movie not long after that called The Millionaire or something. It had Robert Redford, Demi Moore, and Woody Harrelson in it. Woody Harrelson plays this guy in Las Vegas. He loses all his money. The millionaire is Robert Redford. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $1 million for one night with your wife, Demi Moore. He says, okay. That is 20th century or 21st century droit de seigneur, which is the idea that if you have enough power, if you have enough money, you can get pretty much anything you want, which is what the Count was counting on because of his power in society. He could just do what he wanted. So.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that, Tom. I think it's a little different when you're talking about feudal privilege, as it's constantly described in the opera, that you have the right to do this and you don't have to pay $1 million. But that does lead us to what the larger discussion of the Marriage of Figaro is all about, and it is about the droit de seigneur. Twyla's mentioned it in her comments from the Countess's point of view, and Tom from his experience with it, of what the social station of all of these characters just happens to be, and what the privilege is that follows from that. Because the most frequently cited comment about the Beaumarchais plays were that they launched the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. And when you think about that and the impact on Western civilization as we know it from the end of the 18th century, that the very idea that servants could challenge they weren't just masters, they were owners. You know, when you lived at Acqua Fresca, which is the name of Almaviva's estate, it was like being a Russian serf. Your rights, your family history, all of these things were transferred to the ownership. You were a piece of property, so to speak. And that's why this droit de seigneur is referred to as a feudal privilege. So this becomes something specific because of the joyous nature of these characters, Figaro and Susanna, and the joy of their marriage that is pending and has been approved by the Count, but he still uses it throughout the first 2/3 of the opera. Well, it's on again, no, it's off again. You know, he's trying to stall to be able to exercise this. But the interesting thing is the starting point of the play, coming from the joyous relationship at the end of The Barber of Seville, where he has foiled Dr. Bartolo, he has married Rosina, And one of the first things that he does is abolish this feudal privilege. He says, it will not apply to me and my lands and people. And then along comes Susanna, and he thinks, maybe I was too hasty. But the point is that he has abolished this, and Figaro tries to use that repeatedly in his encounters with the Count. He comes in the first act, leading the chorus of peasants that work, and they're all bringing flowers and gifts and praise for abolishing this very painful privilege and for the honor that he has bestowed upon his estate by doing so. And so now he's trapped. And what's interesting is the man is modern in his thinking in that he doesn't just say, well, thank you for that, and I'll do what I want to do. Instead, he feels now that to maintain this facade of honor and dignity, that he is willing to go through all of these machinations that we need in opera. You know, mistaken identities and letters and all of the stuff that makes opera plots work. But it does work in this case. So the linchpin to this, if you will, is in fact this discussion of the droit de seigneur, the very idea that he, after abolishing this privilege, would say, not publicly, I'm going to reinstate it. So what changes is not his demand that it take place, but the idea that he can actually seduce Susanna, and therefore it is a kind of consensual relationship. And obviously she is in a very different place, and I'm sorry that Lisette is not able to be with us today, or she could probably speak at length about her interpretation of how to play this, and there's some beautiful moments. But just to waltz very quickly through what is a very convoluted plot, and I don't want to get bogged down in too many details, but it opens with, it is the wedding day of Figaro and Susanna. A slightly dark cloud lurks over this because Marcellina has loaned Figaro some money, and I guess in a whimsical agreement, she said, if you don't pay me back, you're going to have to marry me. And he says, sure, I'll sign that contract, and he does. And now she is coming pressing her suit. He hasn't paid her back. It's his wedding day with Susanna, and yet Marcellina, and this is again one of those ties between the characters from The Barber of Seville and the characters of Figaro. Marcellina was the household manager or housekeeper or something for Dr. Bartolo. And Tom, maybe you'd like to.
Well, there's
Berta Marcellina.
the Berta Marcellina thing is not definitely accepted.
Right.
Some people say, well, this is the interpretation of Berta in the Barber, but I've never seen them as the two characters. I don't think Marcellina is a cleaning lady. I don't think she's a maid.
Fair enough. But when they come to this moment of truth, he mentioned the sextet, when it is revealed that in fact Figaro is his son and her son, then they say, let's just forget all the complications of that old love affair.
Yes.
And I accept the fact that this is my son.
This is my son,
and
you're my wife, and we'll get married whenever you want to. And she says, how about today?
We'll make it a double
We'll make it a double wedding.
Right. So, you know, there's so many layers to this, but the plot is really that simple in absolutely the skeleton. So that as Susanna realizes that she is in a bit of danger. I don't mean physical danger, but in the sense of her chastity being assaulted. And she tries to tell Figaro, who is slow to understand this, for a character that's supposed to be one of the most quick-witted on the operatic stage. And she says, why do you think he gave us this room? Yes, you think it's because our bedroom is only 2 or 3 steps from the Countess's bedroom where I attend upon her. But remember, it's also only 2 or 3 steps from the Count's bedroom where he wants to attend upon me. And then we have an interesting and lovable character, Cherubino, long tradition of pants roles in operas, and that is where the lower female voices, youthful characters singing the role of boys. And so we also have a mezzo-soprano singing, Julie Boulian singing the role of Cherubino. And Cherubino, one of the things I did disagree with a bit, Tom, about Peter Sellers, was putting Cherubino in a hockey uniform, because in Donald Trump's penthouse he's wearing a New York Rangers hockey uniform. The only problem is in the aria Non più andrai, in which Figaro is chiding this kid, and first he says, don't go anywhere, even though you've been ordered to report to Seville for military duty. He said, just hang around. And they talk about his plumed hats and his silken garments and things like that, because he's a fop. He is a child of privilege. He is the godson of the Countess, and so he flits around a little bit of shadow of the Count, and chasing every skirt in the castle. So it's kind of a fun character, because we don't think that Cherubino is going to do a whole lot of damage, but
ultimately he does.
well, in the last opera, the last
talk
play.
about that.
Well, the last play of Beaumarchais is La Mère Coupable, which means the guilty mother. And that, in that, the Countess actually has an illegitimate child by Cherubino. Why, I've questioned this so long, why does Beaumarchais choose to push it that way? And it's because what he wanted to do was, with very broad strokes, paint the decadence of the aristocratic society against which mankind was revolting. And so, why not then take a sympathetic character like the Countess with a very young man and end up with the most compromising of circumstances? And that, to Beaumarchais, was a very powerful statement. That's also a tradition that Strauss picked up on. Many of you probably know Der Rosenkavalier. It opens with the Marcellina, who's 33 years old, according to that very long aria she sings, where she wants to stop the clocks because she thinks time is running out on her at that age, and is having an affair with a 17-year-old boy. So, Octavian. So it's an absolute mirror of what we find in the Beaumarchais plays, only transported to yet another locale.
And then there's the great irony of Cherubino, a woman, playing the part of a boy and then being dressed up as a girl. The first time I saw that, I went, wow, that's pretty complicated.
Now, I have to share with you one of the most charming notes I ever got from students attending a final dress rehearsal was from a girl in the 3rd grade that wrote to me, utterly confused about that. She said, well, first, the young lady singing the Cherubino was Oriental. And so this girl writes, with utter indignation, there was this, she couldn't figure out first whether it was a girl or a boy, but she said, there was this Chinese, a girl dressed as a boy, and then they dressed him as a girl. This is nasty. So that child probably has a phobia about the marriage of Figaro. But anyway, so Cherubino is a totally lovely creation, if you will. But all of the subtext is that you have the true human condition in nature, in its utter purposefulness, with Figaro and Susanna and their pending marriage, and then you've got swirling around all of that the decadence of the Count, the sorrows of the Countess, the roles played by all of the family members, from Antonio the gardener to his daughter Barbarina, whom the Count also chases, and she's just a little girl, and she's infatuated with Cherubino. And in fact, there's an also wonderful, fun turn where once the Count feels that he has actually trapped the Countess, then Barbarina innocently pipes up and says, well, when you ask me to come sit on your lap and you know, we cuddle like that, you just said, ask me for whatever you want, and what I want to do is marry Carabino. So Carabino's a little bit trapped there too, in the sense that he is young and of noble lineage, and she is the daughter of the gardener, but she gets her way too, because the Count cannot find a way around that. So, as I say, there's so many interesting details in this, but it is largely about this oppression of the social system and how Mozart addressed it. Mozart himself felt this oppression. You know, he recognized that he had an exceptional talent. Remember, he took 6 tours of Europe with his father and his sister, who was also a child prodigy. And yet they lived in Salzburg. And Salzburg in the 1750s and 60s was not, I mean, it was a prosperous city, but he worked for the Elector of Salzburg, and his father was the court Kapellmeister. Mozart saw greater horizons, and he constantly petitioned to leave Salzburg, to go to Vienna to work and to go to other cities, and was constantly turned down by the Elector of Salzburg, who saw one of his leading court musicians just kind of wriggling out of the net. And Mozart was very resentful about this. So I think he did have an axe to grind. He is the one that took the plot of The Marriage of Figaro to Lorenzo da Ponte. It was his choice of a work, and I can see how much I think the real personality of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is present in the personality of Figaro. So he's making his own statement, and then you know from plays and movies and things like that, he gained some recognition at the court of Emperor Joseph, but was never given the full exalted position of being the court composer. And good Lord, I mean, you know, has Vienna ever produced, well, Vienna produced a lot of great composers like Beethoven, and Mozart, Schubert, and Brahms, long list of them. But this,
Robert, I just got a cue from one of the ladies that they're ready for us to come eat.
Oh, wait,
So
can I just
I'm going
say
to
one
open the
thing?
table to questions actually before we go.
Because we didn't mention this before. For those of you who don't know, the Marriage of Figaro is being dedicated to the women of the Women's Guild to thank us for all we do. And it was wonderful because when Rainey Mize, the opera board president, said, Betsy, let's do this. How about Lucia? And I'm going, wait, Lucia's a nutcase, who killed? I mean, is that the message you want to give to the women? So then they moved to Figaro, and I was going to ask, well, now what is so wonderful about the woman in Figaro? And you answered that question. But both performances, and besides, Todd, tell about the wonderful package and things you put through.
It's a great little package where you can get tickets that are $45, and it includes both a backstage tour for the show at an hour and a half, and we're going to reserve a section for the Women's Guild in for the for nuts and bolts, and then all your seats are going to be together on the ground floor. And so if you have friends who are in the guild or anybody who have been involved with either any of the fundraisers that the women have put on this year, you know, particularly Mad Hatters. Here are chairs of the Mad Hatters from about a month ago. Anybody who's been involved with the fundraising, please let them know. This is a great opportunity to see one of the best operas ever, and to help the Women's Guild in the opera.
But if you already have tickets, can you get the backstage tour?
Oh, no. You know what? If you already have tickets, you can get the backstage tour.
Yay.
Okay.
Let me know.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, let me know. I'll give you that.
Season tickets,
It's a
we should,
wonderful thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
a
mean,
good point. If you can
sure.
do that, well, the backstage tour, just let me know. Call me about it. I'll put you on the list. Okay. Now, real quick questions. Anybody have questions about anything that you've heard today that's spurred?
The Mozart movie has been on TV
Just
several
recently.
times this season. F. Murray Abraham
Abraham
plays the
Salieri.
villain. And I guess the main reason why Mozart is defeated in concluding this is because the French Revolution just happened. And that's all I know.
Have you ever heard Salieri's music? I have. It's not that good. And people say, oh no, you should listen to someone say, he wasn't that bad. No, he was that bad. And I'll tell you what, Mozart wrote a piece called eine musikalischer Spaß, a musical joke. And in it, the whole piece, it's a serenade, 4 movements, and it's all a parody of the worst composers of his time. He's got melodies that go nowhere. He's got harmonies that go nowhere, and he ends on a total discord where the French horns are playing in half tones against each other. It's just awful, and I think that he had Salieri in mind. Here's an example of one of his tunes. It's over and over. It's just insane. But you listen to anybody that, except Haydn, who is, in my mind, is his equal in some aspects. But Salieri, whew.
Well, you mentioned a very interesting thing. Mozart was so aware of the music of his own time. Of course, the most famous example is in the last act of Don Giovanni, when he's having his banquet scene and he has an orchestra on stage and they're playing excerpts of the leading tunes of the day. One of them is an opera called Una Cosa Rara. Actually, the first performances of The Marriage of Figaro were suspended, were delayed because the emperor chose to put Una Cosa Rara on the stage instead. And so, but Mozart knew these, he could not only make fun of them, he could incorporate them into the fabric of his own compositions. There's a interesting, unique little moment in the first trio where Don Basilio sings E bella cose fan tutte, and as you know, the third of the De Ponte cycle is Cose fan tutte, and that melody is used in the overture of Cose fan tutte. So, I mean, he just had this intellect that was comprehensive. But what I want to emphasize is not the social strife of this piece, because I don't think that we go to performances of The Marriage of Figaro to dive into that. That there were, I would quote two people. One was one of the reviewers, a Hungarian poet actually was there reviewing it, and he said, there are not words to describe the joy of this music. And he said, what you leave with is this utter sense of joy. Now, we know how that great finale works, and if you know that, then you can understand the spirit of that statement. The other was Johannes Brahms, another great composer in Vienna, who said, I consider every piece in this opera to be a miracle. I do not see how it is possible for a person to have achieved such total perfection. And that from Brahms. You know, and Brahms is a fascinating figure because he was one of the 19th century's greatest composers, but he never wrote opera. He wrote fabulous symphonies, he wrote oratoric music, wrote some profound piano concerti, made the interesting comment from my perspective about Bizet's Carmen. He said, I've sat in the audience and listened to Carmen 60 times. It is one of the greatest examples of orchestration I have ever heard. So he knew opera. He just didn't write opera. It was not his sensibility. But he had such a profound reverence for this particular opera. So when musical intellect at that level makes such laudatory comments, it's hard not to say, we need to examine this for the joy or the perfection that's in it. And that is what, my response to bring it to a close, and please, I'm trying not to dominate the conversation, but is that if the audiences feel that way, then you can imagine how we as the performers feel in digging deeply to deliver that joy or appreciation for that perfection and the respect that we have for it and realize what a big job it is.
With that, I'm going to thank you. The women are waiting for you in the next room. Enjoy yourself. The bar is over here. And if you have further questions, feel free to talk to them afterward.